Deep in the Alaskan wilderness, a mining crew just walked into something that has never happened before in the history of Gold Rush. Buried beneath a forgotten stretch of frozen ground, drill after drill has come back showing numbers so extreme that even veteran geologists are refusing to believe them until they see it with their own eyes. If these early readings hold up, this single stretch of gravel could be worth close to $500 million. Stay until the end, because what happened next inside that gold room changed everything for this crew. For years, Wade Corrigan had been known around the Alaskan mining circuit as the guy who took the ground nobody else wanted. While bigger operations chased proven claims with long production histories, Wade kept circling back to a patch of land near an old, mostly forgotten creek system that had been passed over by 3 different companies over the last 2 decades. Most of them walked away after a season or 2 of disappointing numbers. Wade always believed they had quit too early, and that the real gold was sitting deeper than anyone had bothered to drill. He spent the better part of 2 winters going through old assay records, handwritten notes from long-retired prospectors, and faded topographic maps that most people in the industry had completely forgotten existed. What he found kept pulling him back to the same conclusion. Decades earlier, a shift in the region's ancient waterways had likely buried a channel of extremely heavy, gold-rich gravel far below the layers that previous crews had reached. Nobody had the patience or the budget to dig that deep. Wade decided he would be the one to finally find out if his read on the ground was right. Getting the operation off the ground wasn't easy. Wade had to convince a handful of longtime investors to back a project that, on paper, looked like a huge gamble. He laid out his research, walked them through the old records, and made it clear that if he was wrong, this could be the most expensive mistake of his career. After weeks of back and forth, he finally secured enough backing to bring in heavy equipment, hire an experienced crew, and start the process of proving whether this forgotten ground was hiding something extraordinary or nothing at all. The first few weeks on site were slow and unglamorous. Crews spent long days stripping away the overburden, the thick layer of soil, gravel, and rock that sits above any potential pay layer. It was cold, physically brutal work, and the kind of grinding routine that rarely makes for exciting footage. Equipment broke down in the freezing temperatures. Storms rolled through and halted operations for days at a time. More than once, crew members quietly wondered whether they were wasting their season chasing a theory built on old paperwork. Then the first serious drill results started coming back from the lab, and the mood around camp shifted almost overnight. Instead of the modest gold values everyone had been bracing for, several of the drill holes showed concentrations far above anything typical for the region. At first, the geologists assumed there had been a mistake in sample handling, so they immediately sent a second batch through for independent testing. When those results came back nearly identical to the first, it became clear this wasn't an error. Something unusual really was sitting beneath that ground. Wade later admitted that when he first saw the numbers, he didn't celebrate. He read the report twice, set it down, and told his lead geologist they needed more data before anyone got ahead of themselves. He had seen too many mining dreams collapse after a handful of promising samples, and he wasn't about to let his crew get emotionally invested in a story that might not hold up. Still, word spread fast through camp, and even the most experienced hands on site admitted they had never seen early numbers quite like this. Over the following weeks, the drilling program expanded. More holes went in, spaced out to map the size and shape of whatever this deposit actually was. Instead of tapering off, as most gold zones eventually do once you move away from the richest core, the value stayed consistently strong across a surprisingly wide area. Geologists began putting together a rough model of what they were looking at, and the shape that emerged matched almost exactly what Wade had predicted based on his research into the region's ancient buried channel. By this point, heavy equipment was running around the clock. Excavators worked in shifts through both daylight and the harsh Alaskan darkness, clearing away the remaining layers of overburden to finally expose what the crew had started calling the target zone. The tension on site was impossible to ignore. Every operator knew that the next major push of dirt through the wash plant could either confirm the biggest discovery of the season or reveal that the deposit thinned out sooner than the model suggested. When the first real batch of pay dirt from the target zone hit the wash plant, the entire crew gathered near the sluice to watch. Nobody said much. Water rushed through the system, gravel tumbled down the line, and slowly the mats began to show color. Not just scattered flakes, but thick, consistent streaks of gold running the length of the recovery system. One of the longtime operators later said it was the richest cleanup he had witnessed in over 15 years in the industry. From there, the results only got more dramatic. Cleanup after cleanup came back strong, and the production numbers started climbing at a pace nobody on site had anticipated. Engineers began cross-referencing the daily totals against historical records for similar operations in the region, and the pattern was unmistakable. This wasn't a lucky pocket of gold that would fizzle out after a few good days. It behaved like a genuine, sustained high-grade zone, the kind that mining crews spend entire careers hoping to stumble into just once. As the season progressed, independent lab verification became a priority. Wade insisted on sending samples out to multiple accredited labs rather than relying on a single source, wanting to eliminate any possibility of error before making bold claims to his investors or the wider industry. The additional testing came back consistent with everything the crew had already seen on site. Gold purity was high, recovery rates were strong, and the underlying geological model held up under closer scrutiny from outside experts brought in to review the data. News of the operation slowly began circulating through mining circles in Alaska and beyond. Other operators who had once dismissed that stretch of ground as played out started asking questions. Geologists who had walked away from similar projects decades earlier wanted to understand what Wade's team had seen that they had missed. It became a quiet but persistent topic of conversation across the industry, the kind of story that spreads not through press releases, but through operators comparing notes at supply stores and equipment auctions. Inside the camp, the mood had changed completely from those early uncertain weeks. Crew members who had spent months grinding through frozen overburden with no guarantee of a payoff were now watching daily production reports that kept breaking their own records. Wade made a point of reminding everyone that the season wasn't over and that mining could humble even the most promising operation without warning. Even so, it was hard not to feel that something historic was unfolding in real time. As drilling continued to expand the mapped boundaries of the deposit, the geological team began putting together rough estimates of what the total zone might be worth if production continued at current grades. Based on the volume of material still untouched and the consistency of the values recorded so far, some of the more conservative estimates put the potential value of the discovery in the hundreds of millions of dollars. More optimistic models, factoring in the full extent of the buried channel Wade had theorized about years earlier, pushed that number even higher, edging toward what could become one of the largest placer gold discoveries reported in the region in decades. Everyone involved was careful to stress that these were estimates, not guarantees. Gold deposits can be unpredictable, and grades can shift dramatically as mining moves deeper or further along channel. Wade repeated to his team, and later to reporters who caught wind of the story, that nothing was confirmed until the material was actually processed and the gold was sitting in the vault. Still, the scale of what the data was suggesting was enough to make this one of the most talked about stories in the mining world that season. As the weeks went on, the operation kept delivering. Each new area opened up along the projected channel continued to produce strong recoveries, reinforcing the geological model rather than undermining it. Engineers on site described the deposit as unusually consistent, without the dramatic drop-offs that typically signal the edge of a gold zone. That consistency became one of the most encouraging signs for the team, suggesting they might be dealing with a genuinely large-scale deposit rather than an isolated rich pocket. By the time the season began winding down, Wade's crew had processed more material and recovered more gold than any operation he had run in his career. The final numbers were still being compiled, pending official weighing and market valuation, but preliminary figures made it clear this had been an extraordinary run. For a project that started as a long-shot bet on decades-old paperwork nobody else had bothered to take seriously, the outcome exceeded even Wade's own expectations. Standing at the edge of the pit as the last loads of the season moved through the wash plant, Wade reflected on how close this project had come to never happening at all. If he hadn't spent those long winters combing through old records, if he hadn't convinced a handful of skeptical investors to take a chance on ground everyone else had abandoned, none of this would exist. He credited his crew for pushing through brutal conditions and long months of uncertain results before the payoff finally arrived, insisting the discovery belonged to everyone who had worked the site, not just to him. Looking ahead, Wade and his geological team have already started planning next season's exploration. The mapped boundaries of the deposit suggest there could be more untouched sections extending deeper and further along the ancient channel, areas that current equipment and time constraints didn't allow them to reach this year. Nobody is willing to promise those areas will produce the same results, but the early data is promising enough that the team has no intention of walking away now. For an industry built on risk, patience, and the willingness to believe in ground that others have given up on, Wade Corrigan's discovery has become a reminder of what can happen when someone trusts their research over conventional wisdom. Whether the final numbers land closer to the conservative estimates or push toward the more dramatic projections that have circulated since mid-season, one thing is already certain among those who watched it unfold. This is a season that will be talked about in Alaskan mining circles for a long time to come. If you enjoyed this story of grit, risk, and one of the boldest gambles in modern placer mining, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of this discovery is still being written, and nobody wants to miss what comes out of that ground next season.